Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What is the bat squatch? Can flying dinosaurs still be seen in America's skies? If these monsters are real, where do they come from and where do they go?
Hey there, I am Ben, and this is the 568th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. And those high-flying questions and peculiar squatches came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. And this is our first broadcast of 2015, and we bring you one of America's foremost authors on a very fascinating subject of cryptozoology. And she is well-versed in many areas of it, and we welcome your calls this evening. Numbers are 800-449-1240, that's from anywhere in the U.S. or Canada, or 401-766-1240, that is locally. Also, we will be monitoring email. You can email your questions to Paul at behindtheparanormal.com, and all that good stuff.
Author, investigator, and artist Linda Godfrey has written 16 books on strange creatures, phenomena, and people. She's a frequent guest on national TV and radio shows, and this is her second appearance on our show. Her latest book, published in August, is American Monsters, A History of Monster Lore, Legends, and Sightings in America. Other books include Real Wolfmen, True Encounters in Modern America, as well as Weird Wisconsin and Weird Michigan in the Barnes & Noble Weird U.S. series, and Strange Wisconsin, Strange Michigan, The Poison Widow, The Beast of Bray Road, and Hunting the American Werewolf among the titles. Linda and her family live in Wisconsin. I don't know if it's safe out there with all these... Anyway.
It doesn't sound safe at all. But Linda Godfrey, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal, and we hope that you're safe.
Hello. Well, I'm feeling pretty safe this evening, talking to you guys, so...
Oh, very good, and Happy New Year, too.
Oh, yes, indeed. Happy New Year. I forgot that it was a new year. Alrighty, so most people get their cryptozoology from TV shows. So how inaccurately do the media portray these monster sightings compared with historical records?
How inaccurately? I would say reliably inaccurately.
Well, at least they're reliable about it. In what ways?
Well, what they want is a sensational story, and sometimes, the facts just aren't quite sensational enough for them. The other thing that they sometimes do is blur the actual quoted characteristics about a creature to make it sound like something else. I've seen shows that will actually pull in totally unrelated clips from other shows about different topics and make them seem as if they're part of it. There's always a lot of creative cutting and pasting. So really, if you're only getting your cryptozoology from TV, you're getting a very skewed picture. And I'm not even mentioning the ones where the so-called investigators are just paid actors going out and looking silly.
Boy, we know just what you're talking about.
Oh, yes. But it's entertaining to watch, though, because it just looks it's so goofy.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't take it seriously. So what are these creatures, and why do we refer to them as monsters?
Well, monster is almost a generic term these days. It's applied to so many things. But when you say monsters, people generally think of something that's not right, something that's too big, something that is going to frighten you, will look like it might eat you, has generally fangs, fearsome features, and is just the kind of thing that makes you go, that shouldn't be, it's not right. And so that really encompasses a very broad range of things, all the way from very ancient legendary creatures to things that go about by air, land, and sea, in many different ways. So, it's a very broad topic. And when I wrote this book, what I wanted to do was sort of bring to people's attention the fact that there is a huge, wide variety of really unusual-looking animals or semi-animals. It's hard to say for sure what they are, that sober, credible people, many of whom don't want their names used because they don't want their neighbors and friends to make fun of them, or they don't want to be, become infamous in their own neighborhoods or anything like that, that are seeing these creatures. And what I hear over and over again from people who contact me, and I've been at this for going on 23 years now, is that they're just really happy to find someone who will listen to them it's almost like a confessional in some way, and not tell them they're crazy, not make fun of them. And I tell people truthfully, there's very few things you can tell me that is going to sound any weirder than something I've probably already heard already.
That's probably a good point. I'm pretty sure that people have said that to us. Yeah, it's like, oh, you're going to think I'm crazy. It's like, no, we've heard some pretty crazy stuff. But is this in your research, what's your standard for an encounter that's real or one that isn't real, or how do you tell the difference between a hoax and what is really going on?
Well, there are different types of encounters that I vet, and I do really try and vet a lot about each one that comes to me. Some are really easy. There are a few that are just like, hey man, I saw a 10-foot tall werewolf in the cemetery last night. That one, bing, goes in the circular file. Any of them that have a mocking tone, they're out the door. And then there are the vague ones where people will write me and say, well, I saw something brown and furry between the trees. And I'm like, did you get a look at its face or, its ears? Well, no, all I saw was some brown fur between the trees. That could be anything. So that may be a very sincere and credible report, but there's just not enough to it, and I regretfully have to tell people, I'm sorry, I just can't really do anything with that. And then there are other types. There's the super drama type of report where I really have to wonder when people are giving me these crazy and minute details and things I've never heard before. Like one was a report about some guy who said he was in a cemetery and he just happened to have a silver lance with him, and he just happened to strike the creature in the eye, and green ooze flowed out, and I'm, thank you very much.
It was a lovely story, but no.
Yeah. So it's really amazing, but and those, I don't mean to give an impression that there are a lot of those kinds of reports, because they're in a very small minority. Probably 90% or more of the stories that I get, I can tell, are from sincere, credible people. Some have better sightings still than others. Their daylight sightings are usually better for seeing details than the nighttime ones. Some are closer. Some are right out in the field with it, while others are just zooming by in their car, or it's zooming past them while they're in their car. So there are lots of variable factors. But really, most of them, especially in terms of what I call the unknown upright canines, which I think is more accurate than the term werewolf, especially in terms of that one, I would say that, again, probably 90 to 95% of the reports of those creatures I've got don't portray anything that couldn't be just slightly adapted, maybe subspecies version of a natural large wolf or wolf-dog hybrid. Most of them, they display their eyes glow in the headlights, but it's the natural yellow or yellow-green eye shine of a normal canine. They're walking or running on their hind legs, but that is not a supernatural or impossible thing to do. It just doesn't usually happen because they're not built to do that. They have to be motivated or trained to run around like that. So that's the main characteristic. But otherwise, they're not part human. It's not like people are saying, I saw, Jack Nicholson sprouting fur and changing into a werewolf. It's just not that way. They are running on their toe pads or digitigrade as canines normally do. They're not flat-footed like people or Bigfoot or even bears. They have pointy ears on top of their head. They have long muzzles, fangs. They don't have real shoulders, although sometimes their upper forelimbs are more developed than normal, probably because they're hauling around deer carcasses with their newly freed forelimbs, things like that. And they do strike people as a little uncanny. People feel that they seem more intelligent than normal animals that you might run into, and that they're just as interested in checking out the people as the people are interested in trying to figure out what they are.
So do you tell the this is just what I've gathered from what you've said so far. So it seems as if you base what's true on the consistency of reports. Am I overstepping, or is that moderately accurate?
I'm sorry, the first part of what I didn't quite catch the first thing you said about the consistency and accuracy.
Do you determine accuracy of reports via like the consistency between different people reporting the same thing? Like if 20 people say they saw the same thing but in different areas, would that make it more plausible? That's what I'm saying.
Well, yes and no. I mean, overall consistency is something I take into consideration. But just because somebody reports something anomalous that another person didn't doesn't mean that I'll discount it. You know, if they seem credible, it may be that there's a plausible explanation. Maybe the one they saw looked a really weird color, but then you find out that it was, in the shadow of an outdoor lit Christmas tree or something. Sometimes there's an explanation for that. And other times, I like to think, well, if I'm taking all these other things they're saying on faith, I'm not going to eliminate this one just because there's something a little different about it. Maybe that's a new clue. Maybe it's something that no one else has noticed.
So how often do you get these reports, like on average? Or, well, reports in general, really? Yeah,
I probably average 1 to 3 a week.
That's impressive, actually.
After 22, it is. It absolutely astounds me. I had one come in today from Fresno, California. There are weeks when I get lots more than that. Once in a while I'll have a dry run time where I don't receive much for a day or two, but then, something else always comes in.
Is there something that's reported more than anything else, like some sort of phenomena that people report most often to you?
Well, I tend to get more upright wolf-like creature reports than the other things, but I still get an amazing amount of reports of Bigfoot and all kinds of other larger birds, the bat squatch, you name it, Mothman type things, water creatures. And that happened right from the get-go, right from the start. People began sending me not just the wolf-like creatures, but also the Bigfoot and the other things. And I thought, these things seem just as interesting. And I felt that all of them, and when I began in this, I was a journalist, I was a reporter for a newspaper. I didn't know what to think, but two thoughts were uppermost on my mind. One was that if there really were some kind of strange, sort of undocumented predatory animals prowling around the backyards and the woods and the fields of the United States, that people had a right to know about them and know that this was something they should watch out for and maybe be aware of. The other thing was that I thought, well, what if there is some weird explanation that these aren't real, that something is totally unknown and bizarre, is making all these people insist that they saw these things. Maybe it's some kind of folklore in the making. Maybe this is how legends come about. And that, any sociologist or folklore recorder would probably be very happy to have that kind of first-hand information as to seeing how legends are born. So I felt right away that it at least was something I should keep track of and just record.
No, I think that's extremely intelligent of you. Very good move from one who knows little to nothing about cryptozoology. But we're going to take it back just a little bit because your book focuses has some fascinating looks at North American monsters that predate permanent settlement by Europeans. Can you tell us about some of those, like Quetzalcoatl and all those things?
Yeah, Quetzalcoatl is the Mesoamerican god. He goes by different names, but you can find him in several of the Aztec culture, Mayan cultures, different ones with slight variations. But he is generally one of the main gods in their pantheon. Sometimes the main one. It's thought of as a feathered serpent, so that would be a flying serpentine being. I think that bears a lot of resemblance to dragons, which you find as the earliest gods in, say, China. You find these in the old Sumerian civilizations. They go way, way back, and they kind of prefigure also other things that such as the thunderbird, which is one of the major creatures that you find in the North American tribes, which is a very highly placed spirit creature that has feathers and is huge and is able to battle with other creatures, and that does good things for the people. Sometimes they're connected with civilization, but they sort of prefigure dragons and giant birds and all these other amazing things that go through the sky.
Huh, that's interesting. I never actually picked up that connection between them and dragons, though. Fascinating. I didn't get to the section on dragons just yet, but I am looking forward to it.
Okay.
Sure.
Not to let this pass, I couldn't help but notice, Linda, you mentioned a case from Fresno, or at least a report from Fresno, California that came in today. Can you tell us what that was about?
It was a report of a wolf man, where a man was with several people, and they were outdoors someplace, and two of them at least, I'm thinking maybe three of them, saw, and this was a really weird one. Here's a case where there's an anomaly. This creature ran out from behind some trees and ran in front of the group in full view of them. They all had a really good look at it. They said that it had very wolf-like head and paws. It was covered with fur, a little larger than an average human, but from below the waist, it was bare. It was almost furless, and he said the legs reminded them of human legs somewhat, but and that could be a case of mange, although usually mange doesn't occur evenly. It's just on one half of the body, usually a spotty sort of thing. But they were all extremely shaken up, and he said one of his friends that saw it he said he just sort of went dead in the eyes, which I thought was a really chilling remark to make. It took him a while. It was like he went somewhere and his eyes went dead, and it took him a minute to come back. And unfortunately, I have that on my email account, but my computer has been crashing all day long. And in fact, right now I'm running a major scan of it. I'm sure I got a virus or something.
Yeah.
But so I can't exactly look at it and get you the complete details. But that's that's what I remember of it as best I can.
All right. One thing that bothers me, Linda, I don't know about Ben, but and I'm not an anatomist. I'm not a veterinary any kind of veterinary expert at all. But I know that cats and dogs, which would include, of course, the canine world of wolves and all this sort of thing, really are not meant to stand up. And you brought this up. Are constructed, to do that at all. It's for a few seconds or a minute at the most, even if they're trained or motivated, as you say. But the reports, many of them seem to involve very large, upright creatures. And as a matter of fact, one of the incidents in your book that is from New England here is an upright deer in Maine. And that's just not meant to. So, how do you explain that? Unless you're prepared to say that you got, as in folklore, human beings turning into these things or shape-shifting.
Yeah, and I'm not prepared to say that. I say in all my books, I do not believe in traditional werewolves. I don't believe that humans physically change every corpuscle and atom of their body and their DNA, and their teeth grow long, and they sprout fur, and their muscles contort, and they elongate their spines, and their knee muscles shrink up. It's just way too impossible. I don't believe that. However, you'd be surprised at how well a lot of four-footed mammals can get around on their hind legs when they're motivated. There's a beautiful, bears are one example. A bear is a good example of a creature that will stand up and look at you. It'll take a couple steps. It can be trained a little bit to do, what they call the dancing bear act.
Sure, yeah.
We're famous in Russia and stuff. But generally, if I've seen bears in the wild plenty of times. My dad is from northern Wisconsin. And when they want to get somewhere, they get down on all fours and they can really book it. They can go at great speeds that way. But there's a beautiful YouTube video of a female bear with a couple of cubs that had an injured forelimb and began walking upright sort of out of necessity. And it's quite erect. It runs beautifully. There are also YouTube videos on, there's one called the Merengue, M-E-R-E-N-G-U-E, dancing dog. If you Google that, you can find it on YouTube, where a man has trained this little dog to just beautifully dance around into this complicated, all on its hind legs. There's another one, a little push that just died. It was on Geraldo Rivera years ago, called Faith, the Wonder Dog, that was born without its forelimbs and was trained to run alongside its master when they went for walks. So they can do this. The question is, why would they do this in the wild? It does give a few possible advantages. For instance, it's much easier if you can carry your prey away in your forelimbs up off the ground. You're much less likely to have somebody else follow you and grab onto it while it's dragging on the ground, and tear it away from you. If something is living in an environment where it's like, for instance, think of the old prairies along, through the Midwest, where there were these tall prairie grasses, and if you were bound to the ground, you wouldn't be able to see things coming at you, whether prey or something to watch out for or whatever. But if you were able to walk along upright, you could see more. So, and again, this is mere speculation on my part. I'm not a biologist myself. I've written at pretty good length on this in my books. But the interesting thing is that the one variation, these creatures that people describe almost always sound entirely canine, but they'll say, it did have claws on paws, not hands, but the paws seemed slightly elongated. And that makes a lot of sense because that would be a sensible adaptation and one that would be rewarded in terms of breeding. For if you were wanting to stand upright, it'd be a lot easier if you had a longer paw, or if you were going to hold things in your forelimb paws. It would be a lot easier if they were a little bit bigger. So you can see how natural selection might select for something like that.
Yeah, you can. I'm thinking of, I might be a little more skeptical. Were not for the fact that Ben and I were in San Diego at SeaWorld a few years ago while we were on doing a program out there, and I'll never forget the sight of an otter running out on the stage and handing the guy a can of Pepsi. You remember that?
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. So it certainly gives credibility to what you're saying about adaptability. But it leads to another question, Linda, and that's, if we have an evolutionary, if we have a mutation of this kind that's in the wild animal population, how come they aren't, dancing down the street, and how come they aren't more reported more readily? Is it or more frequently? Is it what's going on with that?
You mean why aren't we seeing more open views of the upright wolf-like creatures?
Yes.
Well, for one thing, they can easily, according to witness reports, they can just as easily go on all fours as they can on two legs. And oftentimes witnesses will see them running along on two legs, and they'll look around and realize they're being observed, and then they'll drop down to all fours. And also vice versa. People will see them running on all fours or doing something on all fours, and then they'll stand up and run away on two legs. I suppose it's a matter of their personal preference. But they do seem elusive. They don't seem to want to get their picture taken on cameras. And I have no explanation for that, other than it seems that other cryptids, like Bigfoot, the term, you've probably heard the term blob squatch instead of Sasquatch, which refers to the fact that almost any photograph that's ever been taken of what people purport to be a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch is mostly blurry. It's not good enough to stand as proof positive of these creatures. And the upright canines are good at this. The Bigfoot are good at this. Almost any of these creatures seem to have an elusive quality, a seeming ability to foul up electrical equipment, or at least to sense it and stay off of it. And I don't know why this should be. I often give the comparison that a bear is a good example of an animal that is generally thought of as being elusive. You know, guidebooks will say if a bear is around and doesn't want you to see it, you're not going to see it. And yet, we have them kind of encroaching into southern Wisconsin, and if a bear shows up in the backyard of somebody in Madison, Wisconsin, you can bet that at least 3 of the news TV channels will have reporters over there taking photos of it, and the bear won't mind. The bear will be up in a tree. The bear will perfectly, doesn't do anything to, turn the photos into gray masses of static noise, whatever. It's there on the TV for you to look at. This never happens with the cryptid. And that is a major mystery, in my view.
Well, we have a suggestion about why that occurs. Now, I think it was years ago when you were on. I'm sorry to say it's going to be more frequent from now on.
Sure.
But we brought up the idea. See, our particular point of view, and I get into this in the late 1970s, I couldn't figure out why there were certain characteristics to paranormal phenomena that I was seeing and the people around me were seeing. And it just, the old explanations, spirits of the dead, whatever, didn't do it. They weren't good enough. So I got into quantum physics and the idea of brains, B-R-A-N-E-S, like as in membranes,
right,
has developed over the past 30 or 40 years. And that's sort of the sort of parallel reality thing, and the idea that all things are possible somewhere or somewhere, and all you need is an intersect.
Right.
With the right kind of energy, which seems to be really, you've got electromagnetic boundaries between these things. These brains seem to be made of electromagnetic energy, and when that happens, plasma can develop, which is just electrified air molecules, and that, I think, explained a lot of the stuff in the photography that we saw. And if you got something with a bit of a brain between you and it's going to be blurry. And that may be an oversimplification, but I think that's at least part of the explanation. We'll get into that after the break. We're going to take our break now. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley, and a chilly one at that. We'll be right back with our wonderful guest, Linda Godfrey, and American Monster, so stay with us.
Hi, I'm Greg Bell, the host of When Radio Was.
Why, Mortimer.
Bill.
Is that you under that blindfold?
Bill, with this thing on, I can't see who I am.
No, I imagine not. Can't you see anything at all under that blindfold?
On a clear day, I can see the blindfold.
You can?
Yeah.
When Radio Was, shows from the past for today's imaginations.
When Radio Was airs Monday through Friday, right here on ON 1240 Radio at 11 a.m. and 11 p.m.
Sounded kind of like an upright canine behind that blindfold, but in any case, I wanted to remind you of several of the charities Ben and I have adopted on the show. And you can see the full details, or the links anyway, at BehindTheParanormal.com, our show website. And I'll just remind you of a few locally here. We have Builders Helping Heroes, a organization, a subsidiary nonprofit of the Rhode Island Builders Association, which helps veterans and their families, war veterans who have lost families who have lost loved ones, and war veterans who have been severely wounded in combat. And we've got construction and remodeling going on to them at no charge. Wonderful, wonderful group. Also, USACares.org doing wonderful things financially for veterans and their families. Also, to our north, Canadian Veterans Advocacy. .org. That's Mike Blaze in Ontario doing great things up there for the folks who have served in the War on Terror from Canada. Also, non-veterans charity out in Los Angeles, Youth Mentoring Connection out in Los Angeles. Tony LeRae out there doing wonderful things for at-risk youth using indigenous wisdom. And again, nothing occult about it, just good common sense from our remote ancestors, and bringing honor and pride to people who are otherwise at risk in society there. And that's youthmentoring.org. So check that out. So let's get back to our conversation with Linda Godfrey. And we're talking about American Monsters, her book, American Monsters, A History of Monster Lore, Legends, and Sightings in America, Linda S. Godfrey. And the idea of where these things, Linda, come from and go after you see them, and a sort of lack of physical evidence, again, sort of lends credence, in our opinion anyway, to what we said before the break, and that's that these things can be sort of drop-ins from in parallel world intersects, which are the normal state of the planet, in our opinion. These things take... I suppose, the multiverse of reality, however you want to define that, being like Swiss cheese. There are electromagnetic reasons for this, and a sort of balance that elegantly spreads throughout this whole kind of creation. But I mean, what say you? I mean, has that entered the realm of possibility for you?
Oh yeah, I try to keep a very open mind. I think it's a lot more likely than people in this world changing physically into werewolves, definitely. And the interesting thing is that, again, this was something that I started looking at very early on, because I've always tried to talk to our Native American people who have their own views on this. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the ones that I've talked to, and I've talked to elders in different tribes, and one elder that was an anthropologist who was very interested in these things. And one idea that I've heard many times is that they'll say, well, the Bigfoot and the Dogman are both actually basically spirit creatures. And they come from the spirit world. They know where the doors are. And when they're here, they're fully physical. They need energy. They need to eat. They can leave footprints. You know, they interact. But when they want to go back to their own world, they know where those doors are. And they can just go back. And that's why you can't find them. That's why you don't find dead bodies. And it also, to me, would explain if something is coming from maybe, say, a parallel world or an adjacent world where it's sort of similar to ours in that we can both recognize animal forms from it, but if it's out of our view, out of our sight, perhaps that's because maybe their whole world is based on is based a few steps up the electromagnetic field ladder. Who knows? And so perhaps they're at a slightly different literal vibration than we are. And in fact, I actually just tweeted this to somebody. I was having a conversation with it a little about an hour ago, that our trail cams are not built to their specifications. They're meant to capture things that are physically solid in our own realm and from our own realm. But when you put something there that is a few notches up or a few notches down, it doesn't register correctly on our equipment.
Well, that makes sense, as particularly given the opinion of some physicists that these worlds, parallel worlds, have may have very, very different laws of physics, one to the other. Some may be very similar, some may be very different, and that sort of lends credence, I think, to that particular point of view. I mean, I can't think of any better explanation for most of these things. But then leading right on from that, Linda, that leads into another thing. Operating on that theory with all paranormal phenomena that we investigate, and we're not cryptozoologists. It's mostly some ghost research and UFOs at this point. Although, you run into many different kinds of phenomena in the same area.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you that. In your research into the cryptids or the monsters, whatever you want to call them, uncategorized creatures who are very elusive, do you run into UFOs, ghost phenomena, poltergeists, such as in the Mothman cases in the Ohio Valley in the 1960s? And John Keel, who was a journalist like you and I, identified certain possibilities for consideration, such as we're talking about now. Do you find that in cases that come your way?
I do. Yeah. John Keel called these window areas.
Sure.
Because it's as if somebody in this other world left the window open, and then all this weird stuff got out.
Effectively, yeah.
Yeah, and then we see it. Yeah, I drew my own little illustration of that idea in the opening part of American Monsters.
Indeed you do. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, and so I do see this from time and time again. And UFOs or strange lights of one kind or another are probably the most common other phenomena, but it's very likely that where you find Dogman, not too far away, you may also find Bigfoot. I identified in one of my earlier books what I call the Jefferson County Square of Weirdness, and it's the county just north of Walworth County in Wisconsin, which is my own. And I happen to I like to map things out because it shows me concentrations of things and where to focus on certain things. And
yeah, we do too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great tool. And I realized I was mapping out all these things that were in southeastern Wisconsin, and I realized that this county, right at the center of it, is the site of one of the earliest sightings of one of these creatures. It's known as the Gadara creature because it was seen digging by a night watchman in 1936 in a burial mound, and it stood up and kind of growl spoke what he thought sounded like the word Gadara, which, if you look it up in the Bible, is the area where Jesus cast the demons out of the swine and told them to go into the sea.
Yeah.
In this region of Gadara. So that's in the center. It's also the longtime home of Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of JFK, who was lobotomized by her father. But in that same county, you also have ancient Aztalan, which is the remains of a very old Mississippian fort-style town where there are burials of that show possible cannibalization. There's a so-called princess burial of a hunchback woman who is thought to be an elite ruler, buried with what would be considered today a fortune in trading beads and shells, and mounds where people to this day will go and say, if they sit on those mounds, it's now a state park, they'll see visions. One woman I know who's a professor and plays the flute was sitting on one of these mounds playing a simple type of pan flute, and she and her husband both suddenly saw people dressed in very old deerskin clothing, doing things, going about, and sort of a phantom type of view of these people. So
a phantom world, yeah.
Yeah, and there's right nearby that is Rock Lake, where there are pyramidal stone structures on the bottom of this lake. That's been featured on TV, and that's supposed to be home of a lake monster called Rocky. There's a ghost road where people have seen giant birds, not just ghosts. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
Oh, yeah.
Bigfoot sightings, you name them.
We live right near the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts, so it's, you name it, it's there. And we've been working in central Connecticut. So we're working on it. It's too bad you don't live closer. We could hang out and do some cases.
Oh, yeah. I would love that.
But in any case, I think we have a question from a listener. But, okay, we have Bob from, I believe, Bob is from Cumberland? Okay, let's get Bob on the line here. Hello, Bob. You are on WON?
No, he's not.
No, he's not. Okay. Well, we'll get Bob here. But in any case, Linda, the issue of physical evidence is always brought up, and the question is what constitutes evidence. And we'll talk about that when we get Bob now, right? Okay, Bob. I'm here. Oh, hello, Bob. Are you with us? Welcome to the show.
Here.
Yes, you have a question. You have a question for Linda Godfrey.
Yes, Linda. You must be familiar with the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah.
Yeah.
Okay, boy, I'll tell you, I've picked up for the second time. I read this book, Hunt for the Skinwalker, a scientific investigation of what went on at Skinwalker Ranch. Are you familiar with that book, Hunt for Skinwalker?
So. Very much so. Yep.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you have. Okay. Boy, it was one of a bucket full of odd occurrences. If you ever want to talk about that subject, huh?
Well, we have actually. Yeah, but go ahead, Linda. You can see your question.
But I'll let her answer. I'll get off.
One thing about the Skinwalker Ranch is it has introduced the idea of those portals that you were just talking about, or entrances into other worlds. I think it was one of the first books to really bring out a lot of public awareness on that, because they would see these openings in the sky, and inside they could see this creature, something unexplainable.
Exactly.
And
and thank you for the call, Bob, by the way. Yeah, we oddly enough, we cannot get near that case. We can't get anybody on the show from there, and we, of course, it's a little too far for us to pretty much go, but I don't know if that's just oversight on their part or whatever. I don't know. I'm trying to get George Knapp to come on and talk about it. But in any case, it is a very interesting case given that situation. Now, speaking of books, and that is an excellent one, Hunt for the Skinwalker. Let's take a minute before we finish burning up the hour here, Linda, and talk about your books and your website. Go.
Well, my website is lindagodfrey.com. It's a WordPress. You'll find my blog there, and you can get an example. I don't write up every single thing I do on there, but you can see some good examples of the kinds of things that I busy myself with. And there's a real interesting case that happened in Heartland, Wisconsin. I called it the Heartland Harry thing that you can look up, and you'll find all kinds of things there. I've got some research that I did on some of these giant Native American skulls and skeletons that happen to have been in my own backyard. Not literally, but I mean very close to where I live. So I've been researching those for like 10 years. That kind of thing. And then I've also got a page that has my books and biographical information. There's another one that has my first fantasy fiction book that's out, which is a little different, and it is not about werewolves. nothing like that. You can read all about it. It's called God Johnson, The Unforgiven Diary. And on the books and bio page, you can find links to all of the books.
Very good. Excellent. And I must say, and this is coming from a professional editor, your books are very well written, and it's refreshing to see that with some of the rubbish that's out there that I wouldn't use as doorstops. But your book is outstanding, and really we appreciate that there's someone like you out there writing about this very difficult subject. We have trouble finding guests on this subject, as a matter of fact. So you can expect some more invitations. Now, we talked a little bit about physical evidence, Linda, and the idea that we were, things are coming and going in perhaps very, very odd and physically strange ways and this sort of thing. But nevertheless, there ought to be something, and there is. Now, I know that my one foray into cryptozoology was in 1989 when I was sent by a magazine to England to research the Beast of Exmoor, as it was called.
Oh, cool trip. Wow. Yeah. I'm jealous.
Yeah. And there's a long story behind it. And I said, this isn't really not my field, but boy, I learned quickly. And now, in my opinion, I think it was just, you've got some sort of species of cougar on the moors there, and they weren't native to Britain at the time, and they aren't now. And I could just see some colonel from the Raj just releasing the thing when Parliament passed the Animals Act in 1976. But in any case, it was very odd. There was a very long strand of hair that was found black, and several witnesses I talked to had seen two of the creatures at the same time, and this sort of very interesting. And then no sooner I got back here to New England than we had what they referred to as the Mansfield Mystery Cat. Mm-hmm. So within a year, I got a call from the Massachusetts Environmental Police saying that people have been seeing this one, and the fire chief out there in Mansfield, Mass, was laughing at this until he saw the thing right across from his own house one morning. And it was a very large cat, and I believe the strand of hair was tested and came back as related to a domestic cat, only really, really long. And so, you have all these odd things. So as far as physical evidence is concerned, how much is there for, say, the lycanthropy type things, the upright canines, things of this sort?
Well, the best thing that we have for those is their footprint, because they do show up as very large canine-type prints with claws, which tells us that they're not cats, because cats walk with their claws sheathed usually. And they're normally 4.5 to 6 inches wide, which is really, really big. And sometimes you can even see another mark that sort of looks like a heel print, but it's where the hock touches the ground if it's preparing to spring or something. You know how it'll sort of a creature on its hind legs will rear back a little before it springs. And so I've got a number of the footprint photos, have found many of them myself. That is probably the best physical evidence. And again, evidence is not the same thing as proof. You have to pile up evidence until you find the smoking gun that totally proves it. So that's a little bit of a different thing. And then you do have hair too. The trouble with the hair thing is, since now with the dogman, they appear to be totally canine. So I think that if somebody did have a hair that would test out, how is a hair sample going to show that they have elongated paws? The main difference between them and others, or that it walks upright when it wants to. If everything else is still the same, I think it's just going to show up as some type of wolf or wolf-dog hybrid. I think it should be a little better for Bigfoot or Sasquatch because, a giant unknown primate is not something, is not a usual animal that we have here in North America. However, there's no benchmark firmly established DNA or hair follicle structure, or hair, there's another word I'm reaching for. Just the structure of the hair. A lot of things can be identified by that. Morphology, the hair morphology is what I'm trying to think of. There's no baseline comparison for that either. So you just have to say, well, it could be an unidentified primate, but who's to say that's a Bigfoot,
Sure.
So the very fact that they're mysterious hampers us from confirming anything using these scientific tests.
Well, now you've had several encounters of your own. Can you tell us about one or two of those?
Well, I think that I may have seen part of a dog man.
Okay.
When I was, and I opened up my book, The Michigan Dog Man, Werewolves, and Other Unknown Canines, with this anecdote, which is I was in the field with a History Channel cameraman working on some Monster Quest witnesses that we had gone there to visit, and we were staked out on this lonely, desolate road. It was like 3 a.m. because that was when the witnesses who were with us had seen at different times what they described as a 7-foot-tall, grayish, dog-like creature that ran upright, and a slightly smaller, dark brown one. So we have a spotlight trained in this one area. We're seeing green eyes shining at us from the bushes. We're hearing things running around, hearing things like some giant dog shaking its fur coat out. And all of a sudden, I happened to turn, and right at the edge of the spotlight, something just hit that light so that you could see the fur on its back illuminated for a moment. That fur, though you couldn't see any of the rest of the animal, it was in deep shadow, was gray, and it was vertical. Whatever it was running upright. And the other thing that I saw was that it momentarily blotted out a reflective road sign. And when we measured that road sign, it would have had to have been 7 feet tall to do that. And one of the witnesses also saw it at the same time I did. Unfortunately, the cameraman was turned the other way, as usually happens.
Yeah.
That's probably why it picked that moment to run.
That's true.
The witnesses just got crazy scared and insisted on leaving immediately, because they'd had better looks at it than that.
Yeah, wow.
So that's probably my only look at a dog man. But
well, if you talk to Stanton Friedman, he says he's never seen a UFO. So
there you go.
Yeah. Ben has a question about one of his heroes.
One of my heroes? No, I when I first opened the book, the thing that caught my eye the most was Bat Squatch. Mm-hmm. And I considered to myself before reading further, what is the Bat Squatch? So could you briefly describe what the Bat Squatch is?
Yeah, the Bat Squatch of Tacoma. And these things have been around a little bit longer, I'm sure, but it was dubbed Bat Squatch by a young man in 1994 in Tacoma, Washington. And I interviewed the newspaper reporter from the Tacoma, Washington News Tribune, who knew this teenage young man who had the first known sighting of this creature. To describe the creature, it looks like some kind of a furry wolf-like thing with huge bat-like wings that are usually described as 15 to 20 feet wide or more. And this person was driving along. His car stopped. Talk about electromagnetic fields. His pickup truck's engine suddenly failed, and only 30 feet down the road, he saw a huge and horrific being descending out of the dark sky, whomps up this big cloud of dust, and stands there and staring at the teenage driver. And he's just sitting there feeling really weird, sort of scared, doesn't know exactly what to do. And then it had yellow eye shine, no fangs, but white teeth, The face was like that of a wolf, covered with fur, weirdly blue fur, and finally it unfolded its wings and flapped off. Now, the weird thing is, you think, well, this is over in the western Pacific. There could be all kinds of big creatures by the oceans. You've got the Bigfoot. But this same thing has been seen over in the East Coast. Some of the Mothman descriptions sounded like bat squatch. And then you have more sightings of them around Pennsylvania and Ohio, even over downtown Chicago. I've investigated one myself in Wisconsin. I called it the Wisconsin man bat. So what are they? It's hard to say. One common denominator is that they do seem to be able to just vertically zoom away with this horrible shriek. And in the case of the Wisconsin men that saw it, they both became physically ill. They pulled a truck over. The younger one threw up. The older man was sick for a couple of weeks.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I do believe it's probably the best name ever invented for any cryptid.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned several cases, Linda, in our last few minutes here in New England, one of which struck my fancy. It was the frog men or frog people of Fairfield County, Connecticut.
Yeah. That one's just kind of a weird one. Usually, I've determined that frog people are mostly going to be urban legends.
Well, these could be New York commuters in this case. That's right down in New York City. Yeah. Yeah,
they could be. And I'm trying to. I've got two different reports of like frog people, and I'm trying to remember which one. These weren't the frog-faced aliens. No, I'm sorry. I've got some on the West Coast and some on the East.
No, I know. Yeah, you do tend to get they do tend to get jumbled in your mind.
But I'm thinking this was sort of a clan that was supposed to be living out amongst themselves, and they just had this weird froggy look about them. Is that the one that I'm thinking of, or that you're thinking about?
Yes, pretty much. And but I remember it was in the period during the 70s when the Loveland frog man of Ohio was reported, and there seemed to be a sort of an outbreak of amphibious cryptids, if you want to say, during that period. And I find that interesting as well. I believe it was the Dover demon right near here was reported at that time as well. And Lauren Coleman, the great cryptozoologist, investigated that. So there seems to be always something going on. The Connecticut frog folk here, amphibious humanoids tend to stand out in the crowd. Love the way this is written. The frog people of Fairfield County, Connecticut, prefer to leave their secluded country compound only at night. Okay, frog, the 1970s. Weird U.S. Yep, and so that's on page 269 of your book, American Monsters.
Right.
Very interesting stuff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I do compare them. I compare them to things like pig people, which I've got 3 different legends of pig people around Wisconsin, and every single one of them I can pretty much rule out as urban legends. And these things do spring up too, and that's a different sort of thing. Another type of urban legend would be the weird things that lumberjacks make up in their campfire tales,
Mm-hmm.
So that's another reason to really dig into these things and try and differentiate among them.
Well, exactly. And probably, maybe you have time. What do we have time, Ben, for? Just maybe one
not much time.
Quick question about the Wendigo. We have 2 minutes?
Yeah, we don't.
I guess we're done.
We don't have a lot of time.
Okay. Well, Linda, it was a great pleasure to have you. Wonderful conversation, and let's stay in touch, and we'll have you back soon.
I would love to, anytime. And thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Let's give your website one more time.
It's just Linda Godfrey, GODFREY.com.
Outstanding. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great new year.
You too.
You too.
Bye.
All right, let's do our announcements.
Indeed. So you can visit our show website at BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find nearly 600 free podcasts from both ON 1240 and our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio, along with special shows and podcasts.
And I've written a couple of books myself. You can find those at Amazon.com, Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble Nook. Includes Faces at the Window, Footsteps in the Attic, Turning Home, God, Ghost, and Human Destiny. And if you're into Rhode Island history, another hat of mine, Rhode Island, A Genial History, written with my good friend Glenn Laxton, formerly of Channel 12. A wonderful historian as well. I hope I am, too. But anyway, if you buy them directly at BehindTheParanormal.com, I will be happy to sign them for you. You'll help us keep all those podcasts free. And check again those charities we mentioned on the earlier part of the show.
Indeed. So next Monday, January 12th, here on ON 1240 and ONWorldwide.com, we will welcome British researcher Derek Savory. It'll be a Savory show where we talk about the paranormal flap areas he has researched in the UK.
We leave you this evening with a practical quote from American author Maria Robinson. Nobody can go back and start a new beginning, but anyone can start today and make a new ending. I'm Paul Eno, and we hope you enjoyed our show this evening on cryptids, monsters, or whatever you want to call them.
Whether it be sea serpents, dragons, bat squatches, regular squatches, or all variety of squatches thereof.
And we're very interested in your reports of anything strange that happens. Paul at BehindTheParanormal.com or Ben at BehindTheParanormal.com, whether it be cryptids or ghosts or anything else you may have happened to run into. We cannot guarantee that we will be able to do anything.
But we can at least advise you.
We could advise you, and emails do, however, pile up, and that's why we're having more open line shows. Okay, very good. So again, I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.